when you started, you had taken over a failed Kickstarter. And I think you did a good thing where you basically promised the people who had invested in that original Kickstarter that you were going to deliver something to them like under $1,000 in honor of the fact that they had sunk money into it. And even though you didn't have to do that for them, I think that was great. So what was the very beginning of this project?
Yeah, the very beginning is that, I mean, going way earlier, which is I just like going to great cafes as I went around the world. I originally went to my local coffee place in the Bay Area, a place called Mr. Espresso. At the time, I didn't know it was an E61, but they sold me a Rocket E61. And I struggled with it, and after 2 years of home barista and books, I sold it because I just made bad coffee consistently. Then later I got a GS3 because I figured I just hadn't spent enough money, and then I still made bad coffee with it. I had an Anfim grinder, and I had good gear. And it wasn't until I got one-on-one training with an Australian guy that I then, 2 weeks after the training, started to make good coffee. And what that really taught me was, like, this is just way too hard. And the reason it was hard is because there was no feedback. And then as I learned more, I also learned that the E61 was giving me wild temperature variation in my hot water. So that was a problem. But of course, there's no temperature gauge to tell you that that's the case.
Sure.
So, you know, there's that old adage, which is what you can't measure, you can't manage. So, so it was just in my head. So when this Kickstarter came up with these computer geeks who seem to know what they're talking about with coffee, I was like, okay, I want one. So I bought it. It never shipped. And when it crashed and burned, I thought, okay, maybe I can help out. So what happened is, like a good Silicon Valley guy, what I did is I went to where the experts are, which is Seattle. All espresso machines on the planet are basically either Italy or Seattle. There's a few exceptions, but mostly that's the case. And I hired some consultants, in fact, someone who worked on the GS3, and they looked at that Kickstarter thing and they said, you're much better off starting from scratch. Because they've gone down to a path that is just never going to work. And that's my engineer said the same thing is, you know, if you've got $1 million to spend to make this Kickstarter work, just do it from scratch.
Okay.
So that's the genesis of that is I had already researched whether the market made sense. And what I really wanted was like a pressure profiling small cheap machine. But what actually happened is in order to pull that off, we had to go to some less expensive technology like vibratory pumps and heat on demand. And my inventor, Ray, very quickly realized that his boss, me, didn't know what the hell he wanted.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know enough, right? And then, in fact, no one knew enough. So he said, I'm going to make a machine that can make anything. So he eventually did. It took 3 years. And he figured no matter what requirement John comes up with, I'll be able to do it.
Right.
Now, totally blew his budget in that process. But in that process, what happened is you and I got to know each other well. My level of coffee knowledge came up. You came and visited us in Hong Kong. But then I also, as we started getting betas and then you put me on tour, I started meeting people who actually knew coffee well. And I started showing them the software that I was writing. And we ended up with something that was a 3-year evolution, essentially a product that was collaboratively made between Ray, myself, you, Matt Perger, heavily on Home Barista and Coffee Snobs and Coffee Geeks, everyone piling in on every little detail down to the drip tray, and always very open about it. So, so that's the machine we built was essentially, hey, let's advance the state of espresso together. And in the end, just the parts cost me more than $1,000. Never mind labor, R&D, all that. And when we started selling that machine at $2,000, we were losing money. At $2,500, we were still losing money. It's only now that we're actually starting at $3,000 that we make money on this machine. So that's the story of how we got here.